Hello, everybody. Welcome to Conversations with Authors. Uh, Thank you, everybody, for being here. It's I see many people pouring in. Sorry, the numbers are over there for me. I see many people pouring in. So I promise we'll get through this introduction quickly, so you can get off to your authors. But please allow me to welcome you to Conversations with Authors. Today we bring to you Mark Nepo, the author of Surviving Storms, in conversation with Brooke Warner. Before we get to our speakers properly, please allow me to welcome you to Conversations with Authors. If you've seen one of these events before, well then, welcome back. If you're new here, then Book Passage is an independently run bookstore out of the San Francisco Bay Area, and we host and run book talks just like these very often throughout the week. As we are now streaming on YouTube and will continue to do so in the future, please consider subscribing by clicking the subscribe button just below the video. It's completely free to you, I should say, and honestly helps us out quite a bit. And as an added bonus, if you click the little bell right next to the subscribe button, you will be alerted every time we go live with talks just like these, so you don't have to miss out on something else you might have really enjoyed. If you would like to check out our upcoming events, or just like the idea of an email newsletter more, you can find both of those at bookpassage.com. If you'd like to check out our speaker's book, which, again, is Surviving Storms, you can find it using the very first link in the description just below this video. Finally, and this one is very important, if you have any questions for us tonight, or for the speakers tonight, please take the time to write them in the YouTube chat. You can write them at any point during the talk. I will collect them and pass them along. And it is the only way to get your questions to them today. They're looking forward to answering as many as possible. So please, if one comes to you, write them and I will pass it along. Now, allow me to introduce Mark Nepo, who has moved and inspired readers and seekers all over the world. A #1 New York Times bestselling author, his numerous books, including The Book of Awakening, The One Life We're Given, and Drinking from the River of Light, have been translated into 20 languages. Mark has appeared several times with Oprah Winfrey on her Super Soul Sunday program. In 2015, he was given a Life Achievement Award by Age Nation, and in 2016, he was named by Watkins Mind, Body, Spirit as one of the 100 most spiritually influential living people. Brooke Warner is publisher of She Writes Press and Spark Press, president of Warner Coaching Incorporated, and author of Right On Sisters, Greenlight Your Book, What's Your Book, and 3 books on memoir. Brooke is a TEDx speaker and the former executive editor of Seal Press. She currently sits on the boards of the Book Industry Study Group, the Bay Area Book Festival, and the National Association of Memoir Writers. She writes a monthly column for Publishers Weekly. That's enough for me, everybody. Thank you for being here. There's many more people here at the beginning. You can rewind and listen to the introduction if you're confused who we're speaking today, but who am I kidding? You're not confused. Thank you, everybody. Now allow me to pass it off to Mark and Brooke. Welcome.
Thank you for that, Nick. Hi, everyone. I'm Brooke, and I have the great honor to introduce Mark just a little bit more personally and to give you some context about what you're going to be hearing today. I'm also really honored to be here virtually with Book Passage, and love all of these online programs that they do, which bring us together in this way. We're here today to celebrate Mark's latest publication, Surviving Storms, Finding the Strength to Meet Adversity, which was published just last week. And I hope that you'll consider buying it through Book Passage, of course. They ship anywhere and everywhere. And Mark, as Nick said in his introduction, is a poet, a spiritual teacher, and of course, an author, best known for his beautiful and profound day book, The Book of Awakening, a New York Times bestseller that sold over 1 million copies. And I have had the great privilege to be working with Mark for the past 12 years. I support him with his events, and I have the great gift of getting to be an early reader on a lot of his books. Surviving Storms is his 23rd book. And when I first read it, I saw how much he met the moment and how much the moment met his writing with this book. Surviving Storms is a book, like so many of Mark's books, about the work of the heart. It's a book that supports us to be with our suffering without breaking and to draw comfort and support from those who've come before us. And those of you who know and love Mark's work know what a tremendous storyteller he is. Every single story in this book is resonant. And just like a resonant chord in music, it's also calming. For me, it drops me into a moment of deeper truth and knowing. And it reminds me of another of Mark's books, the title, That We Are More Together Than Alone. And so Surviving Storms is a book to soothe our nervous systems. And I imagine that many of you are here for that reason. Mark, thank you. Thank you for this and all of your books, and congratulations on this new publication.
Oh, thank you so much, Brooke. Thank you for that. And thanks, Nick, and everyone at Book Passage, the good people at Book Passage. You guys are a tremendous resource. And both Brooke and I are excited to be with you today. And, we're delighted to share that we just learned that there are about 700 to 800 of us gathering today from around the world, and including some of the places that I'm not sure I'll hit everybody, but the US and Canada and Mexico and Australia and Nicaragua, the UK and India. So welcome and thank you for taking time to be together this way. So I want to give you a sense of our time. We imagine spending the first 30 minutes about being in conversation about the new book. Brooke and I will be. And after that, I'll be reading some poems and stories for about a half hour or a little bit. And then we'll use the last half hour to be in conversation with you and to field and explore, speak to, not answer. I have no answers. Speak to your questions and the things that move you. So again, thank you, Brooke. And I can, as Brooke had said, we've been working together for over 12 years, and she's a complete gift. So yeah, please come back in here, Brooke, and let's begin.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I have lots of questions lined up, and I'd like to start with a broad one. What are you trying to explore in the new book, Surviving Storms?
Well, the book started just before the pandemic. I started exploring it, and then of course was greatly influenced by all the journey we've all been on. And we live in a turbulent time. There are storms everywhere, and every generation needs to survive together the storms that come upon us and to endure and build a better world. So, I think that the first part of the book, I try to, with my guess, I've been troubled like everyone. How is it that our global society is where it is today? How did we arrive with all of these tensions and these cross purposes and these isolations and these ruptures? And so I try in the first part of the book to try to, give my best guesses. How are we here? And it goes all the way back to the Industrial Revolution, some of the fault lines that have cracked between us. And then the remaining, really not half, but 2/3 of the book, um, the first part is called Where We Are, but the second part is called Finding the Strength. And what I try to do is reach into all the different practices and traditions, formal and informal, to gather the tools that have been available throughout all time so that we can use them. They're not abstract, they're real, so we can use them for the things we're going through now. An early metaphor in the book is that one of the reasons heart work is so important in surviving storms of any kind is that, and this is the metaphor, is a tree, just as an enormous tree like a redwood out in California, which is so enormous. Well, maybe with climate change, maybe in a severe episode or storm, one could be uprooted, but I doubt it. I think they'd be damaged, but rarely would they be uprooted. And that's because their roots are strong and actually interconnected underground, and their trunks are wide. And that's how they endure storms. And that is what we are all challenged with. We need to have strong roots, interconnected and wide trunks to endure the storms of our time. What does that translate to? Well, that means we have to know our true self and solidify our connection to each other and life itself. And that's especially relevant now. So, as I said, all the traditions offer these resources and practices to help us be strong enough to meet the challenges of our time. And all of this is inner practice. I'll just share one more thing. We'll stop with bookmark for this question. That all of this hard work, we need to personalize it. And as I was exploring this book, I discovered what I consider to be three archetypal questions, which apply in our individual lives, in our relational lives, and in our cultural lives. And these are the questions. When things break or fall apart, the first question, what needs to be repaired? And the second question is, what needs to be reimagined? Now that something's broken, how maybe it needs to be reimagined. And the third, maybe the most important question, now that something has broken and doesn't work, should it be put back together at all? What needs to be left dismantled? And so I find these questions are becoming teachers for me in my own life, and again, even in our society, and in all different ways. So let me pause there.
Such important questions. Yeah, thank you for that, Mark. An early chapter in the book is called "The Old World is Gone," and my goodness, that's another resonant message, isn't it? And it's across. One of the things I love so much about the whole notion of storms is the many meanings. Could you talk about what you were suggesting here with that chapter title?
Yeah, sure. And it's actually the first chapter in the book. And, I imagine other people have experienced this during the pandemic, but I was surprised. Many of you know I'm a long-term cancer survivor. And when the pandemic hit everyone, I started to have, flashbacks to parts of my cancer journey. I thought, wow, how is that? Why is that happening? And one moment in particular came up, and that was the moment I was diagnosed. So I went one day to a doctor because I had a huge tumor growing out of my skull bone, and I had dear friends who said, "You better have that checked out." And I walked in and was told that I had a rare form of lymphoma. And of course, I was afraid and disoriented, and I thought, can you check? Do you have the right folder? Are you sure it's me? And then when I left that office, the door I had come through to keep that appointment was gone. That is, there was no way back to life as I knew it before that appointment. And I think that came back to me because I feel that the pandemic has done this to humanity. The old world is gone, like it or not. And there are a lot of us that don't like it. There are a lot of us that are in denial that the old world is gone, or we're angry that the old world is gone, or we're depressed at the old, but it is gone, and the only way is to move forward is to love each other forward. And that's kind of the doorway to the new book.
Beautiful, Mark. We're talking about the difficulties that we face today, and you write about that as a part of a pattern in history. So could you speak more to this generally and how it shows up in the book as well?
Yeah, sure. I discovered when I did that book that you mentioned, More Together Than Alone, which looks at community throughout history and cross culturally. I discovered that, really history, it's like there are long swells, like history's an ocean, long swells of history that swell and crash century after century. And one age will be more kind than cruel, and another age will be tight and more cruel than kind. One wave will be more open and collaborative, and another will be more narrow and stuck in their self-interest. And so we're a part of that. And it seems that we are a good part of humanity today is stuck in a narrow contraction. And but it remains to be seen. Will we come out and be more collaborative and kind? So we can learn from wherever we've been. And this has brought up another notion for me, and that's the difference between incarnation and progress. So what do I mean by that? Well, outwardly, progress is the noble attempt that we want to leave the world a little better for the next generation than we got it. And it's pretty simple and straightforward. And but incarnation is that regardless of whether we were in prehistoric times or we're in modern, highly technological times, regardless of the tools we have and what the world looks like, no one can live. It is your chance, every one of us. We have the same opportunity and challenge to live this journey. No one can do it for us. No one can replace it. So a good little story that helps show the difference between incarnation and progress is, imagine a tribe, an indigenous tribe. They're migrating to find a place to live where they really want to settle for generations, and they find this beautiful plateau, this kind of cliff overlooking a vast view of the horizon and the earth out in front of it. And so they decide, you know what, we're going to settle there because we want our kids, when they wake up, to never forget that they're part of something larger. And so they devote themselves years to clearing all the trees so that when their children wake up, they can see out there. Well, that's progress, because the kids who are born in that tribe, they don't have to clear the trees. Their parents did it for them. What a gift. But incarnation is, no one can open your eyes and see for you. Everyone has to do that themselves. And likewise, no one can open up their heart and love for you. No one can open up their mind and welcome ideas beyond our own for you. So while these are difficult times, I feel in the perspective of history, it is our turn. In my parents' generation, it wasn't a pandemic, it was World War II in my parents' generation. In my generation, early on, when I was young, it was Vietnam, and the political upheaval that remade our society in the 60s. But now it's the pandemic, and now it's each of us, it's our turn to choose. Will we choose love over fear? Will we choose kindness over cruelty? Will we choose openness over closedness? So let me pause there.
Mark, in several of your books, you explore the notion of a spiritual warrior. So could you speak about what that means to you? I love that term and the notion of it.
Yeah, and that's certainly not my term alone. All the traditions, I contribute to that conversation that has gone on for centuries. And so many cultures have and traditions speak about a spiritual warrior. So I love the Tibetan definition is really one of a spiritual warrior is one committed to a life of transformation. Not a military warrior, not a conquering warrior, but a warrior that is whose soul is committed to a life of transformation. And in the Tibetan mythology, it is known, there's a story, or it's known that a spiritual warrior always has a crack in their heart because that's how the mysteries get in. And so how do we honor that opening and let it be our teacher and not run from it? And another aspect that I would raise about this spiritual warrior, I learned in the last book I did before this, the Book of Soul, that the word war, it actually comes from an Indo-European root, wer, W-E-R, which means to confuse or mix up. So it suggests that all conflict and war comes from confusion, whether that's internal conflict or conflict between you and me, or conflict on a global level or on a national, international level, or a societal level. So what it suggests is that a spiritual warrior is one devoted to the clearing of confusion, both inwardly and between us. And of course, because we're human, we never get rid of confusion. We return. We're clear and then we're confused, and we're strong and then we're wobbly. So this is a lifelong commitment to devote ourselves to the clearing of confusion. So I invite you, those who are listening here, I like to offer invitations, questions for you to be with outside of our time together today. So the first one is, can you journal about or be in conversation with a friend or loved one? Name one way that you are inwardly confused right now. And can you name one way that there is confusion between you and a significant relationship you're in? Could be a partner, it could be a friend, could be a family member or a work partner. or colleague. So can you explore where does that confusion lie and what is the first step in clearing it for you? What does that look like?
Thanks, Mark. I just love that image of those of us with cracks in our heart being spiritual warriors, because it's such a deep honoring of difficult experiences and how we grow from them. And you write about restoring direct experience of life, and I saw a little tether there. And so I wondered if you might speak to how we do this, what it is, and how we do it.
Yeah, sure. And again, I don't have answers, but I can see these connections, and so I want to offer them so we can all talk about them and live into them together. So I think one of the struggles in the modern world, which I don't think anybody deliberately, it is like a perfect storm, a technological storm, a modern storm, how we are so insulated in our own bubbles, both certainly the pandemic made it worse, but with social media and the internet, when it's abused, we are completely locked in our own little bubble of what it means to be alive, and even to the point that we are confused. To speak about confusion, we are confused about what's real and what's not. And so I feel like when we're in that place, there's a good part of our humanity and our society globally that has been cut off from our direct experience of life. And whenever we're in that place of disconnection, we lose our reverence for life. And without that, we do desperate things to feel alive. So, to put all of this, let me go and give you an example. So many of us, I remember watching the insurrection on January 6th, 2021 there in our on TV. And I was, regardless of the positions and who believed what, I was so like stunned to see such barbaric violence while at the same time everyone was taking pictures of themselves. There was this total dissociation, as if they weren't sure if that was real life or a video game. Here we are, here's our confusion. And when we're cut off from the direct connection to life, we'll do anything desperately to try to reassure ourselves that we are alive. So one of the things that I feel committed to, both for myself and in my teaching, is how do we, in very real ways, everyday ways, each of us reconnect directly to life? After all, if I put my hand in the water, I don't need you to tell me if it's wet. I know it's wet. If I'm in pain, I know what pain is. I know what love is. Well, we also know what, it's not as clear cut as that, as sticking your hand in water, but we also know what truth is. We know what peace is. We know what's larger than us. We know what's smaller than us. What are the ways that each of us individually can restore our direct connection to life so that we restore our reverence for life, so that that can help diminish the violence and diminish the dissociation? What do I need to take a picture of myself? If I know I'm here, do I need to take a picture of myself to prove it? So these are the ways we all are suffering right now. And I certainly, like I said, don't have answers, but I feel like this is speaking to some nexus of
Mm.
how we, in a very personal way, can work toward our way out of it.
Well, I'd like to speak about another aspect of heart work, and that's compassion. And you
Mhm.
write about the maturing of compassion. And so, what do you mean by that?
Yeah, there's a chapter in the book that's about that, the maturing of compassion. So what I've discovered just through my own experience over life is this is very normal. There is the first way that we apprentice in compassion. It's just normal and it's ongoing. It's an apprenticeship that never ends, thankfully. But that, say we become friends, okay, and and while we're being in the early part of our friendship, you experience a broken heart. And I've had my heart broken. Oh, we have something in common. So automatically my compassion goes out to you. Or you get laid off from your job and, oh, I experienced that. I know what that, or I've experienced betrayal and you're betrayed. Oh, so our common experience becomes an automatic apprenticeship in compassion. Oh, gee, I went through this too. Maybe I can help, and maybe your experience will help me. And so that's the apprenticeship of compassion. It's based on experience that is common between people. But I discovered and a quick example of that is, I remember in my 30s, I used to play racquetball, right? And at that time, I was in a grocery store and a long line, and there was an old woman in front, and clear that she had a back issue. And I watched from the back of the line, and I had compassion for her, sympathy, and she was very slow because she couldn't walk. You could tell it was painful. And but I admit, the longer it took, I was getting kind of impatient inside. Wasn't proud of that, but I was. Well, I play racquetball, so about 2 months later, I tweaked my back playing. Oh, all of a sudden, I couldn't get to the bathroom. Forget racquetball. Now I understood because now I was her. Now I had something in common. Well, ever since then, if I see someone who's struggling ahead of me online, I don't just watch, I go help carry their groceries. That's what compassion does for us and with us. But the maturing of compassion is that all I realized later in life, that is all an apprenticeship for extending our hearts to people we have nothing in common with. And my first experience of this was very powerful. It was after the war in Iraq. I was out with friends in a restaurant, and in the front of the restaurant was like a bar. How there's a little area, and the seating area was in the back. And I was ordering more stuff for our little party when there was a guy in a booth behind me who was very agitated. And of course, people stayed away from him because he was agitated. But he caught my eye and his, and from what he was saying, I realized he was a vet. He had been a medic in Iraq. And I sat down for a minute to talk to him, and thinking that, just trying to be kind for a moment. And he was really agitated and wounded and upset, and he was talking about his experience. And I said to him, boy, I can't imagine what you went through. And he slammed his fist on the table and said, no, you can't. And after I was like taken aback, I reached my hand on his and I said, but I'm here, I'm listening. And I wound up spending an hour with this guy in the booth. But that was my first lesson in the fact that all of my apprenticeship of compassion was so I could sit with someone that I don't have any way of understanding what he went through. So this is what I mean by the maturing of compassion. And we can't plan these openings, but I think we just have to keep our hearts open in both directions, to those we have in common with and those we don't.
So Mark, so many of your books, you open up to the table of contents and you have these beautiful chapter titles, and you always do such a beautiful job with your book titles as well. So I want to point people's attention to another chapter in the book that's called 10,000 Hands. Can you speak to what that metaphor and idea is about?
This was an amazing, and I stumble on these metaphors and they become teachers for me. So I was very surprised by this one too. And this is a way to try to understand the difference between our infinite desire and the real facts of our lives, like what we're really capable of. So, the heart has 10,000 hands that want to lift and hold and dream and do everything. I want to go everywhere. I want to love everyone. I want to experience everything. I don't want to have to limit it. It's my one life. But we only have two hands. And so, of course, we can't hold 10,000 things. We can't skillfully handle 10,000 things. And so what often happens is our desire, which is the 10,000 hands, when we're intoxicated with life, we often carry more than we can carry. And meaning well, we often promise more than we can deliver. And what we wind up doing, it's very natural enough, I think it's an archetypal position, is We try to live as many lives as possible rather than fully inhabiting the one life we're given. So, and this cross purpose lives in each of us. But what I've come to learn through my own limitations is that rather than try to feed the 10,000 hands, if I can bring the 10,000 hands into the two I have, all of eternity opens right before us. I have now fully entered the one moment. And now, my God, life is more than beautiful and powerful wherever we are. So, an image of this would be like, say we're in a restaurant, there's 10 of you, and I try to bring all of you a cup of tea. I try to carry 10 cups of tea. Well, probably I'm going to spill some of them and maybe burn you or me. But if I bring the 10,000 hands into carrying the one cup and put it before you, oh, we stumble into the sacred moment of all love and all care. So I don't have any answers to how we navigate these things, but I do know that these are always at work in each soul, each of us. We're excited by the 10,000 hands. Ooh, I want to go to every continent. I want to climb every mountain there is. How many? 5. And one more. I want to love 14 people at once. My heart's that big. But we only have one heart, and we only have one life, and we only have two hands. So who can we bring all of that love to the one person before us? To the one mountain that's in our way?
Continuing on the theme of heart work, Mark, as I said, it's centered so much of your work, and another title that you have is in the last section of the book, "The Heart is Still Our Teacher." What do you mean by that?
Well, I do believe that the heart is our greatest teacher, and that the heart is the inlet or conduit between an individual life and all of life. So when we're wholehearted and open-hearted, which we can only know through the life of our feelings, then we're in the stream of life. It reaches us. So the heart is always our teacher. In the Hindu tradition, there's a term, upa guru, which means the teacher that is next to you at this moment. And I love that because there's always a teacher next to you at this moment. So I don't have to worry if I miss this one, because right behind it is another one. And so, in a humble way, when I'm confused and when I'm troubled or I can't get settled, I try to give my full attention to the nearest piece of life before me. It could be the dust on the windowsill or the bird on the tree outside this window. I try to give my full attention to what's next to me until it becomes my teacher, until it becomes a conduit for all of life. And often we do this for each other. I think when we're moved to give and care, often lessons show up for us. And so there's a small poem of mine that goes like this: the mystery is that whoever shows up when we dare to give has exactly what we need hidden in their trouble.
Hmm. Thank you for that, Mark. Looking at the time and where we're at with our questions, I think everyone is looking forward to hearing some reading from you. So I'm going to turn it over to you for that, and I'll be back on the other side for some Q&A.
Thank you so much, Brooke. Thank you. So, I want to share, rather than reading the prose from the new book directly, I wanted to share a constellation of poems that speak to some of these themes we've been opening. And I want to start with a quote from Sir Isaac Newton, the great physicist, right? And he said this beautiful thing toward the end of his life. He said, "I do not know what I may appear to the world, but to myself, I have been only like a boy playing on the seashore, diverting myself now and then in finding a smooth pebble or a pretty shell, while the entire great ocean of truth lay all undiscovered before me. And I think we're sorely in need of that kind of open-mindedness today in our world. So much is beyond what we know. And I don't think we're going to move out of these troubled times unless we can be open beyond what we know, be open to everything. So this first poem is called Inside Everything. And I'm not going to read all of the poems twice, but this one I will. That's as a start. It's a small poem. Inside everything. Keep trying to hide, and in time you become a wall. Keep trying to love, and in time you become love. Our journey on earth is to stop hiding so we can become love. Everything else is a seduction and a distraction. Courage is staying true. Inside everything. Keep trying to hide, and in time you become a wall. Keep trying to love, and in time you become love. Our journey on earth is to stop hiding so we can become love. Everything else is a seduction and a distraction. Courage is staying true. This next poem is called The Great Waters. The Great Waters. And it just comes from a surprise realization that we're meant to be in life and not bypass it. The Great Waters. In the beginning, I thought I was going somewhere. I thought we all were. But falling in while trying to cross, I finally understood the journey is to follow the river. All the rivers, especially the ones no one can see. The soul is a fish whose home is in those rivers. So I can take you across if you want, but the secret is to go everywhere by going nowhere. And I will be here when you fall in, which is not a failure, but an awakening. I will be here when you fall in, which is not a failure, but an awakening. You know, so often it's wonderful to have dreams and plans and goals, but so often in our modern world, we're taught to make gods out of our goals. And so if we fall short or if the direction changes, we think we're a failure. When in fact, I have found that goals and dreams are kindling for a path that I can't imagine. So it's not a failure, it's an awakening. This next poem is, my father who passed away almost 10 years ago now, which is hard to believe. But toward the end of his life, he was in the hospital and he had a stroke. But recently, thinking back, this poem came about he and me, really, our relationship. It's called As He Lay There. When my father was close to death, we were stripped of our history. I sat by his bed holding this ancient twig-like hand of a 93-year-old who, though absent for years, was mythic to me. As he lay there under the weight of a stroke, life undressed the myth I put on him, and he was just a frail old man who had introduced me to the sea, who had loved wood into marvelous shapes, who surrounded himself with books, though he was a slow reader. After a lifetime of holding back, he wanted to speak, though he couldn't. And I understood him completely. You know, I mentioned the term upaguru, and teachers are everywhere. And this teacher came from years ago. We had to have our front door remade, had been damaged. We had to have it remade. And so I had to get estimates from carpenters. And then after having these conversations, this parable, if you will, about thresholds came into being. It's called Estimates from Leo. He said, "You need a new threshold." I said, "I know." He measured the opening and said, "It needs to be bigger." I took him by the shoulders. "Can you build me a door?" He kept squinting and said, Do you want this solid or see-through? I said, it has to open to the inside. He said, oh, it will be costly. I sighed, it already is. He did some figuring and I grew impatient and said, well, can you do it? He asked, well, how long have you been looking? I said, ever since I first came here. He grew serious now and said, well, the glass must be tempered. I said, I understand. He paced and took his glasses off. What is it? I said. He shook his head and said, I don't want to be responsible. I'll waive all liability. He chuckled. Yeah, you can't. He put down his pencil and said, I think you need to make the threshold yourself. I think you need to make the threshold yourself. You know, a few years back, I had a dear old friend and mentor, Joel Elkes. He lived to be 102, and we met when he was 80, and I worried, how much time will I have with this amazing spirit, this amazing teacher? Well, we had 22 years. And I was teaching in New York City the day he passed, and I got a call from his wife letting me know he had passed, and I felt immediate grief. I just felt like, oh, such a emptiness. And I was in Bryant Park. Some of you might, from the East Coast or who've traveled, might know that beautiful small park behind the New York Public Library on 42nd Street and 6th Avenue. I love that place. And I was there, and this poem came called Where Are You? My teacher appeared to me in the midst of my grief for him. I was on a bench in a park in the city. Buses were coughing by and small shops were opening. And since my teacher no longer has hands, he swept a bird in my face to break up my sadness. And since he no longer has a mouth, the light off the windows 20 stories up drifted through the leaves. I said, I miss you. And I thought I heard him say, do everything while you're here. Then it began to mist, though the sun was shining, as if the universe were crying at what it does to us in order to keep going. Just then a child lost a ball. It bounced my way. Now my teacher was in the bounce, and I thought I heard him say, enough of this, pick up the ball and live. And I could hear Joel would say that. Joel would say that. You know, we all know what the struggles and around wearing masks during the pandemic have been. And I was deeply moved that I felt at another level, I still do, that while we need to wear masks or have needed up to this point to help protect each other, inwardly we've been asked to take masks off so we can find our way out of this time together. So this is about taking our masks off, our inner masks. It's called Not a One. A funny thing happened on my way to being awake. I outgrew all my masks. Not a one fit. Not the one I called my past, not the one I called my dream, not the one I wore when sad, or the one I wore when trying to be happy. Oh, I saved them all like favorite shirts I thought would fit when I became myself again, but that was a mask too. Then just the other day, I was more present than lost and had to put down the mask I called my story. And today a gust of light filled my face. I felt it on my skin and in my soul. Now anything is possible. Now anything is possible. And this is a poem, a rather recent poem, about how all our efforts are joined out of view while we're alive and even from one life to the next. This is called Under the Temple. The temple hanging over the water is anchored on pillars that nameless workers placed in the mud long ago. So never forget that the mud in the hands of those workers are part of the temple too. What frames the sacred is just as sacred. The dirt that packs the plant is the beginning of beauty, and those who haul the piano on stage are the beginning of music. And those who are stuck, though they dream of soaring, they are the ancestors of our wings. So I want to share next. This is a reflection. It's a page and a half reflection prose. And I recently learned about E.M. Forster, the novelist who wrote Passage to India. And this is about, he was gay and he lived in the early 1900s. And he fell in love with an Egyptian tram driver, when he was in Egypt. And this is a story about his life that I was so moved by, called What's Left. I learned today that in 1917, the novelist E.M. Forster was in Egypt for the first time. As a conscientious objector in World War I, Forster served as a searcher for missing servicemen. And fate somehow kept making him look for what was missing, and he had worked for the British Red Cross. It was during this time that Forster, who was openly gay, fell deeply in love with an Egyptian tram driver, Mohammed El Adel, an affair that changed his life. Eventually, Forster had to return to England, but the two men kept a faithful correspondence even after Mohammed married. Their love sustained despite being interracial and gay, and despite living a continent away. When Mohammed died in 1922 from tuberculosis, his wife, whose name is impossible to find, sent her husband's wedding ring to Forster. It is this deeply tender gesture from a woman whose name I'll never know that stopped me, that made me want to know the center of this love, the love between these two men, the love between Mohammed and his wife, the love between this woman and her husband's lover. What deeply human pain and release allowed her to be so giving in a time of such grief. This is the wisdom I want to learn. This is the story I want to piece together from all the affections found scattered like feathers in the rain. In the center of our pain and beyond what we can comprehend is a release that heals when we can endure the pain and give over to its release. I felt this pain and release during my struggle with cancer when I was young. I felt this pain and release during the dissolution of my second marriage, when I had to leave in order to live the one life I was given back. I felt it when my father, staring into eternity, held my hand before he died. And now, across the years and miles, I feel it in the small drop of Mohammed's ring in an envelope that his tender wife sealed and sent to England. It is the unexpected gesture that binds us all. It makes me think of my dear friend Robert scattering seed for ground feeders in his yard. It makes me think of my dear friend Paul rowing the empty boat of his life now that his sweet wife has died. It makes me think of my dear friend George sanding the shelf of a bookcase he is making for his granddaughter, or my dear friend Don adding dabs of red to a painting he created 50 years ago. The moments that keep us connected are like the drop of that wedding ring in that envelope over a century ago. It makes me think of my dear wife Susan holding our dog's head during a thunderstorm. It's all we can hope for, really, to hold each other through the storm and share what's left. These moments that don't make it to the news, these are the threads that are indestructible, that hold the world together. These are the threads that are our upagurus, if we are still enough and open-hearted enough and present enough to see them and listen. This is a small prose poem that's really a story. It's called The Symmetry of Kindness. The train slammed into the station, injuring hundreds. The engineer was critically hurt. People toppled over each other, bouncing across seats and against windows. Oh, there was blood and glass everywhere. One woman shimmied her way to the platform when part of the station ceiling fell, pinning her. She thought she would die. Then the hands of fellow passengers lifted her one after another, and she was saved. Later, she wanted to say thank you, but didn't know who to thank. Once on the mend, she went and retrieved a list of those who were with her that day. Now, one by one, she looks them up and then asks them if they had helped her. And each of them smiles and says no. Once with them, she can see what each needs, and so she helps them along. She unpacks groceries for an old woman, listens to a widower's story, and gives a single mom her umbrella. This has gone on for weeks. She keeps trying to find those who helped her, only to help those she finds. Finally, it occurs to her that this is God's symmetry of kindness. She will never know who helped her, so she can thank and help everyone she meets along the way. And this is how our dreams are kindling for the real stuff of life. This next short poem has been a great teacher for me. You know, I feel that I retrieve these poems and then I have to learn from them. I don't know where they're going. I don't know. I'm not that smart. I don't know where they're ending up. I discover them by being true to what they open. So this is a small poem, and this one I'll read twice too. It bears it. This is called Mind as Keyhole. Mind as Keyhole. Beneath the cloud, everything is gray. Above the cloud, everything is light. Calling the cloud unfair is being a victim. Trying to conquer the cloud is being a hero. Calling the cloud a cloud is the beginning of peace. Mind as keyhole. Beneath the cloud, everything is gray. Above the cloud, everything is light. Calling the cloud unfair is being a victim. Trying to conquer the cloud is being a hero. Calling the cloud a cloud is the beginning of peace. And this is a poem called Breaking Surface. Let no one keep you from your journey, no rabbi or priest, no mother who wants you to dig for treasures she misplaced, no father who won't let one life be enough, no lover who measures their worth by what you might give up, no voice that tells you in the night it can't be done. Let nothing dissuade you from seeing what you see or feeling the winds that make you want to dance alone or go where no one has yet to go. You are the only explorer, your heart the unreadable compass, your soul the shore of a promise, too great to be ignored. And so this opens a great paradox about life. Obviously, no one can live your life for you. No one has ever been here who's you. And by following the truth that is in our heart and our mind and our soul, if blessed, we wind up at the one pool where everyone drinks together. Because we have to both be who we are and open our hearts to all that we are not. You know, I want to share here, this is perhaps the greatest haiku ever written, hundreds of years before haiku was discovered as a form. It was 3 lines written by Rabbi Hillel in the 1st century. In the thousands of pages that make up the Talmud, there is this foundational gem, and it goes like this. If I am not for myself, who will be? If I am only for myself, what am I? If not now, when? If I am not for myself, who will be? If I am only for myself, what am I? If not now, when? So I want to share 2 more pieces, and then we'll bring Brooke back in, and we'll have a conversation with your questions and where they lead and what they open up. I thank you for listening and being there today. So this poem is called At Every Turn. When I sweat trying to lift what no one can lift, I am praying. When I fly 1,000 miles to be stopped by the moon on the spine of an ancient mountain, I am praying. When I fall on the lawn in laughter with my dog and she won't stop licking my face, I am praying. When you are winded by the light on the photo of your mother who died so suddenly, you are praying. When your grief lets you feel the pain of those you don't even know, you are praying. When life moves through us for no reason, we all are praying. I am humbled that all my efforts to pray have failed until living is praying with no intent. Now my heart is plucked like the string of a harp at every turn. At every turn. So again, I'm so grateful you're here on this journey today. I want to close this part out, the reading part. Um, Actually, this is the last passage in the new book, and I wanted to read that. It's called The Love of Everything. After more than 70 years, I confess that even when struggling, even when lost, I have never stopped loving everything. And this has enabled me to inhabit life authentically. In the beginning, there were goals I was taught to work toward, and these longings for worth were honed in time into personal ambitions, which all fell away. For staying true to the love of everything as our teacher has turned out to be the most enduring ambition of all. This love has made me get up when I have fallen and has given me the strength to enter the breaks in my heart where I have retrieved my gifts. And so I have very little to offer beyond the affirmation that unending love without preference will lead us to drink from the mystery without leaving the world. Unending love without intent will fill every contour of existence the way light fills every hole. So there is very little to teach, just that love awakens everything and care erases the walls we keep building between us. Thank you, Brooke. Please come back on.
Thank you, Mark, for all of that. And I would love for Nick or to let people know, or I'm letting people know, and Nick is going to grab from the stream any questions that all of you might have. So please bring those on, and we have time now for that piece of it. Mark, you and I just spent recently time together doing the webinar Pain, Fear, and Grief, and I'm sure that some people out there were on that webinar with you. I thought it would be powerful to talk a little bit about that, because pain, fear, and grief was actually a topic that people said to you, we need you to tell us more on these topics. There was such a hunger, and I think you and I were both so moved by people's vulnerability during that session, and it connects with surviving storms. All of us are surviving these storms of divisiveness and loss and so much. And so I thought it would just, while we're waiting for the questions to populate, maybe to say a word on those topics and what you got out of those 3 weeks.
Sure. I was very moved by those 3 weeks. And as you said, I offered that because people were asking about it. And again, I have no answers. I can just speak to it, to the depth of those teachers. And so I think I want to start and just say a little bit about each, and then we can bookmark that. But that the human journey, no one is exempt. Everyone will experience pain, fear, and grief. And grief especially. The old There's an old saying that's trite. It's trite because it's so true that better to have loved and lost than to have never loved at all. And you cannot love without knowing loss. But if you don't love, what's the point of being here? And so, I do feel like this mysterious foundation under life, that life has been made just difficult enough that we need each other to ensure the journey of love. And so let me offer another haiku that opens up this beautifully. There was a Japanese samurai who, after a life of being a warrior, put down his sword and went to study as an apprentice poet with Basho. This was in the late 1600s in Japan. I'd love to have interviewed this guy. What made him put all that down and do that? And so this was his famous haiku. His name was Masahide, and his haiku was, "My barn having burned to the ground, I now see the moon more completely. My barn having burned to the ground, I now see the moon more completely." And inherent, at least, again, when we talk about these things from the past and we quote things, I didn't know Masahide, so I don't know what he meant. I didn't talk to him, but I can tell you what it says to me. And what it says to me is, the barn burning down, the loved one dying, the loss of a dream, the loss of a self, all the different forms of grief, they're real. And there's no bypassing the harsh, deep teacher that moving through that journey will uncover for us. And the paradox that now that the barn's burned down, I can see the vastness of the sky more completely. That somehow at the same time, not to minimize or rationalize the loss or the pain, at the same time, something is always opened. And we somehow are challenged to stay open to both the process of loss and the process of what is opened in us and to us. And fear and pain have their proper place in life. So we can't eliminate them, difficult as they are, but we can right size them. We can right size them. And everyone has their, I think fear gets its power from not looking. We tend as human beings to inflate what we go through. It's natural enough, but our challenge, both inwardly and together, is to help then right size it. You know, I had recently, my heart was fluttering, and it turned out it's nothing serious, it's fine. But when it was fluttering, I went, uh-oh, what's this? And then I made it bigger and bigger, and I needed to turn to my loved ones and to my wife Susan, who helped me right size it, right size it. So we're always needing to do that, and I think that pain is often the teacher that stops us. And the pandemic has been a great stopper of humanity, forcing us to be still, forcing us into the miracle of what is, to stop running from here to there, to stop scheming, to stop even dreaming, so that we can, going back to our conversation, so we can reconnect directly to our reverence for life. So let me just bookmark there as we bring in other questions.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. This one, Joe is asking specifically about a broken relationship with a family member, but I know you get this question a fair amount, when in speaking to something that maybe is broken and perhaps doesn't need to be put back together, and how people struggle with that, whether it's a relationship or a family member. So perhaps, what you can say about that.
Well, I can speak from my own experience that I think that, I have spent in my early part of my life a lot of time trying very hard to make relationships what I hope they would be, rather than accepting the truth of what they are. And so for instance, if I love, if you're a person in my life, family member or not, and I love you, but you're like a bear. You claw at things, you knock things over. You're not really very fuzzy. You're really harsh. But I wish you were a dove. I just, I put all my energy in trying, is there anything I can do to help you evolve into a dove? And then I keep getting hurt because I put my hand out for you to, like a dove would eat out of my hand. And then I get swiped and I get cut. Well, after a while, I have to accept you love a bear differently than you do a dove. I can still love a bear, but I can't love a bear the same way I do a dove or a dog or a cat. And so this opens us to this, the Buddhist worldview and the Buddhist way of practice has a beautiful notion of seeing things as they are, which I think is maybe the simplest and most difficult practice on earth. And so we're challenged to see things as they are, because then we have real choices. So the first thing I would offer is to really look at the relationship as honestly as you can, so that you know what's love is possible, and then it's possible to discern what would that love look like. And sometimes you can't. Sometimes you have to love people from afar. I have people in my life who were dear friends when I was younger who are not friends now. We don't have any contact because it wasn't safe to be in relationship. But I still know their birthdays. I still know what music they like. So they live in the garden of my heart, though and when I stir and miss them, it doesn't mean, oh, I should go call them up, because I have to revisit the truth of the relationship. And where is love possible? When I am included in it, not sacrificing myself, but when I am included in it, so that, I think, so that people care for each other and it's not one way.
Hmm. Thanks for that, Mark. This question, pointing back to what you shared about strangers, Margaret says, when I'm drawn to helping a stranger in obvious need, I'm often stopped by fear, not so much fear of becoming involved in their lives, but of physical danger. How might you deal with that or answer that question?
Well, that's very real in our time, isn't it? There's this cross tension, this cross purpose. And I think that the only thing I know to speak to, not answer, is I think we have to be even more discerning. We have to look at, when we first feel fear, it's, excuse me, it's like a wash. There's adrenaline, it's everywhere. But then if we look more closely, we actually see what part of this scene is actually dangerous. Things get more and more specific. So I think emotionally and in real situations, or in situations like this that someone's raising here, I think we have to judge. We can lean in with our impulse and get more information. Is it still safe to go closer or not? How do we keep discerning? Thomas Aquinas, he talked about discernment, and he said that the fairest branch on the tree of reason is discernment. The fairest fruit from the tree is reverence, not critical thinking, not judgment, not constructive feedback, reverence. So I think the closer we get, I think we have to keep taking in more information, because there are things that are dangerous in our modern world. And yet we can't vanish. We can't vanish, because it's the kindness and that step that will allow humanity to endure where we are. You know, I remember when I did that book, More Than Together Than Alone, and this was an important kind of discovery, was that in the Middle Ages in Europe, which we call the Dark Ages, only 10% of the European population was literate. That means 10% kept literacy alive for over 300 years. Today, in the strident time we're in, when we're awake, because we take turns being awake and asleep, when we're awake, it's incumbent on us through our kindness and open-heartedness and open-mindedness to keep the literacy of the heart alive. To keep the literacy of the heart alive. You know, in the Chinese tradition, there is a term known as Ren, which is hard to describe, but it means benevolence, kindness. It's at the heart of the Golden Rule. And a Chinese philosopher by the name of Mencius in the 3rd century, beautiful, kind-hearted philosopher, he was asked to describe Ren, and he said, I can't really give a definition, but I'll tell you, if you saw a child on the edge of a well about to fall, the thing in you that would make you drop everything and try to catch that child, that's Ren. And that's what you're feeling when you feel an impulse to go help someone. So we just have to keep our minds and hearts open, not being, in a panacea, oh, life is wonderful, but truly to be ever even more discerning.
Thanks, Mark. Gita asked if you could speak more to how to clear the confusion within, some practices to help with that, and what do you do if the confusion persists?
Well, so that's a wonderful question. Thank you. And my God, if you could answer that, you'd change the world, right? So, we're just all trucking along trying. And in truth, all my books are attempts to answer that question in different ways. So, but let me just speak, from a very very specific personal, when I'm confused, I try to lean in. The difficulties of life push us away. And so the most quiet atom of courage is, I got to lean back in. I've got to hold nothing back. I've got to be completely present so that because when I'm present, I see, hear, and think and feel more clearly. So the first clearing of confusion for me always comes from the effort to return to being fully present. And then there's lots of practices and all kinds of things we can speak to. But what is in your toolbox personally that allows you to be more present when you're afraid, when you're confused, when you're in pain? And when you can't do it yourself, amen, man, you reach out to somebody else. Reach out to a loved one, to a friend. And if you don't have a friend, make one. I think this is humbly, we're all really friends disguised as strangers. And it's the difficulty of life that often make us put down our prerequisites for friendship and just say help. And I am a firm believer in give into that need to say help. And if no one's around, reach to the nearest strangers. Can you help me? And that's often how we become friends. Valerie Kaur, Kaur, is a young writer, a Sikh young teacher and activist. She has one book out, a beautiful book, and she has a line in there that I really love. She says, you don't have to know people to grieve with them. You grieve with them to know them. And so, I had someone, a really bright young woman from London interviewed me and asked about, her generation. She said is experiencing an epidemic of loneliness, and did I have any advice? Well, I don't have advice, but what came to me immediately from my cancer journey was You don't interview ambulance drivers, you take the first one that comes along. And if you're lonely and if you're hurting and you don't have somebody who can help, get out and say hello and have to take a risk. And maybe someone will say, "Hey, I don't know you. Thank you very much. I came to Starbucks for coffee. Thank you." Well, that's fine, but you might get someone who is ready to help, or someone who says, "Oh man, I'm feeling the same way. I didn't think you would ask. I didn't think anybody would ask." Kierkegaard. One of the things Kierkegaard said, the philosopher, was that we're all spies for God. And again, I didn't talk to Kierkegaard, but what it says to me is we're all authentic in hiding until pain or love makes us come out of hiding. And then more often than not, we discover we're not alone. So I just want to encourage and support that step, that quiet step of courage for all of us to be who we are everywhere.
Thanks so much for that, Mark. Those are the ends of the questions that have come in from the streaming. So if people have more, by all means, please do put them here. But Jenny actually has an interesting question, which was to explain more about what the haiku by Hillel means, which I kind of love that question because I've seen it 100 times and I've thought about it so much.
Oh, sure.
But an explanation, is definitely worthwhile.
Yeah. Well, and again, I'll speak what it says to me and why it's so touching. Because I think what Hillel does in 3 lines, Rabbi Hillel, is that he talks about the need to be who we are, but also the need to be open to the life of others. So there's a paradox here. We all need, to be. If I'm not for myself, who will be? If I don't stand up and assume my full stature and see what I see and feel what I feel, no one is going to do that for me. I have to speak on behalf of the authority of my own being. No one else knows it. I have to live the one life I've been given. But the paradox is if that's all I do, oh man, life is so much more than just me. So if that's all I do, well, then I quickly become stubborn. I become intolerant. I become vengeful. So one of the gifts of being who we are is that we're then open to truly receive everyone else. So the first line, if I am not for myself, who will be? But if I'm only for myself, what am I? And the suggestion is nothing. If I'm only for myself, what's the point? It's like if you open your eyes and never see, why open your eyes? If you open your heart and never love, why open your heart? If you become a full self and you're not being willing to be in relationship with the rest of life, what's the point? So he raises both the gifts of solitude and being who you are, and that you got to then use it by being in relationship and beginning. Now that I know myself somewhat, I can find out, my God, who are you? What do you care about? And then we're more together than alone. Then the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. Martin Buber, the great Jewish philosopher who gave us the notion of I, thou, and he talked about 2 authentic living centers. They could be people, but it could be a dog and a person, or nature and a person. But when 2 authentic centers truly receive each other, he said that God appears as the unrehearsed dialogue between 2 living centers. So when I can stand for myself and be open to you, who you are, all of a sudden it's like 2 wires, and then if they're close enough, electricity arcs between them. And if not now, when? There's no better time. What are you going to put it off for? There is no tomorrow. If not now, when are you going to do this? Now, right now. Or as Kabir says, the great Turkish Persian poet Kabir, he said, you know, if you can't cross over alive, how are you going to cross when you're dead? So, well, I hope that's a beginning into that. Well, that's a wonderful question.
Beautiful.
And
Yeah,
you know, so, oh,
I
go ahead.
thought, well, no, I thought it's up to you, Mark, in terms of timing. The couple other questions have come in if you'd like to take them or if you want to transition to close. So,
Well, let's take if there's one or two more, let's take them, and then we'll share a couple of announcements, and I'll bring us to close with a small poem.
one is just about showing emotion, crying and saying that she feels that people are maybe afraid to cry, that it shows weakness, and it's a little bit of a open-ended question, perhaps, but yeah, basically asking what's your experience there.
Well, I think that tears are the water of life, and they well up through us when we're true to what we're feeling and authentic. And beyond, they're not certainly nothing to be ashamed of. They're actually teachers in themselves. And we do live in a modern world that is often repressed or afraid of emotion, because when we're repressed, like if you have a hose, and you've had a hose probably in the yard, if it's kinked or folded on itself, when you open it, there's a lot of pressure because it was stopped from flowing. But if it's allowed to flow, it flows steadily. It doesn't have a lot of pressure. Well, most of us, the way we're taught to repress our feelings, when we finally feel something and it bursts out of us, and it has undue strength, and we think, whoa, man, nobody, if it's going to be like that, I don't want any part of it. What we don't realize until we feel enough is that once we are not repressed, once there's a flow from in to out between you and me, between experience and my heart and what comes through me, it has more of a natural, steady flow. And feelings, I believe, are the only way we experience spirit. And through that authenticity, we experience everything that's larger than us. So I think it takes courage to feel, and not to be thwarted, because often the judgments about feeling come from people who are afraid of feeling. So they pathologize it or judge it so as not to have to feel it. And honestly, to tie it back to our society right now, if you don't let truth and feeling out, that need doesn't go away. It comes out sideways. And I think violence is often a last desperate attempt to feel. So I encourage means supporting courage. I encourage you to cry and feel, to cry when you cry and feel when you feel, and be confused when you're confused, and think about how you can clear it.
Thank you, Mark. And Natalie writes that she's still thinking about what you said about January 6th and the selfies, and how to speak with those individuals is of great interest. How would you approach it rather than getting upset?
Well, I don't. I mean, I'm upset all the time. If I had hair, I'd pull it out. Okay. So because we share all of this, don't think I'm not getting upset. And I don't know what to do. I just know this, whether it's in the stridency of our time, or even in just the dynamics of your personal relationships, you can't force someone to listen. All we can do is show up, not vanish, and be greenhouses for each other, provide light and warmth so those in our sphere can grow. They will grow or they won't grow. And I do believe, that we take turns. There is no they. We are they. So thank you very much, everyone, for being here. And thank you, Brooke and Nick and Book Passage. Let me Let me make a couple of announcements. Some of you have asked about some upcoming things, and then we'll close with a short poem, or we'll turn it back over to Nick to finally close. So there are a couple of online things coming up. Actually, this week, this Tuesday, Brooke is beginning a 6-week online class called The Courage to Write Fearlessly. And each of the 6 weeks will be led by a different teacher, a very rich experience. And you can find out more about that at magicofmemoir.com. And my next webinar will be on December 11th, called Saying Yes to Life from Brokenness to Tenderness. And you can find out about that at live.marknepo.com. And I just want to mention 2 in-person experiences that are coming up. Next week, I'll be in Charleston, South Carolina, leading a retreat, the first one based on the new book. And that will be a hybrid event, in person and online, next weekend in Charleston. You can find out information there at the Sophia Institute, all one word, .org. And lastly, some of you have written, I offer every year a year-long journey for a small group of people here in Michigan, where I live, a group of 16 souls. We come together for 4 weekends over a year around a journey that I offer. And so the next one, which would start next March, is open. You can just go to my website to find out details if that interests you. And it's called marknepo.com is the website. So the final poem is a short one. I call it The Moment of Poetry because it's not about stanzas, it's about life. The moment of poetry. When the sweet ache of being alive, lodged between who you are and who you will be, is awakened, befriend this moment. It will guide you. Its sweetness is what holds you. Its ache is what moves you on. So again, thank you everyone for taking the time to be together. Brooke, thank you so much. Nick and Book Passage, you guys are great. We so appreciate you. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you to everybody that was in chat and for all of your lovely comments. I will be sure to share at least a couple of them afterwards. Thank you everyone for your great and tireless support of Book Passage. I would like to remind all of you that in addition to all of the wonderful things that are happening in both Mark and Brooke's lives, that you can still purchase the book from bookpassage.com at the link that is pinned at the top of the chat, or that I just recently put into the chat as well. Thank you very much, everybody, for coming in. We have a number of lovely events which are coming up on the list. You can find all of them at bookpassage.com. Choose a couple that you like. Be sure to be there for it. Thank you very much. Thank you one last time to Brooke and Mark for having such a lovely conversation. I hope everybody got something out of it. Thank you very much. Bye.
Thanks, you too. Bye.